Wilson, what a run, buddy. We appreciate your time every Tuesday.
Investing out there.
It's been great to get the insight here. Obviously, spring and summer will get you back here as LSU gears up for fall camp in August. But they wrap up Brian Kelly's third spring, right? And Brian Kelly has been the one that has called down this season as kind of the year of judgment for Kelly's reign in Baton Rouge. He's always kind of been like, hey, look at me in year 3. Wait until year 3. We got to build this thing. We got to get the roster right. We got to get the coaching staff right. We got to get compliance. Everybody on the same page. This is year 3. After seeing his team that he's going to roll out there via spring, because it could change a lot starting today. What do you make of where the program is under Brian Kelly?
You know, the players referenced something a couple of weeks ago, right after, Kelly said at the beginning of spring practice, he thought this was the closest to being a player-led team, that they were, hitting more of those accountability goals that Kelly has set for them over the last few years with their wellness questionnaires that they have to fill out every day by, I think it's noon. And throughout the facility, there's boards on the video screens that show that they're like whether or not they're above the line. And they're able to really see firsthand if somebody on their team or somebody, on their own SWAT team or on their team as a whole is below those lines. And when Kelly first got here, that number was I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head all of a sudden, but it was significant. There's a lot of guys who are usually below that line especially within like the first week that they got here. But here recently, Kelly said at the coaches clinic, he asked Jake Flint in the back of the crowd, Jake, how many, the strength coach, how many guys do we have above the line these days? And he's like, 3 or 4. They've been able to at least get to that place where, according to everybody, players and Kelly himself, and hearing Jake say that to a room of coaches, I think even gives it some more credibility that they are sort of meeting those thresholds, and being more accountable and doing those sorts of things that Kelly has sort of harped on ever since he got here. Is that going to translate to more wins on the field? We'll see. I think, but in terms of where they are as a program, it is sort of more adopting what Kelly has wanted over the last couple of years in terms of accountability and all those sorts of things. They got to keep always doing those. That stuff can easily slide back if you're not careful about it. But we'll see whether or not that translates, because as in terms of a roster, they're definitely in a more stable position, in a stronger position than when he inherited, 38 healthy players at the Texas Bowl. But they are still also have their deficiencies. As we saw it in the spring game, they got to get better in a few different spots, especially on the defensive side. Got to go and add some defensive tackles here in the portal window. Got to figure out what they're doing at corner. Got to make sure everything's good at safety. Otherwise it seems like they're pretty, in a pretty good spot across every other position. You're going into fall camp, but now you got to retain too, which is certainly an issue that Kelly didn't have to deal with in year 3 at his previous stops. But he's usually said that that's the year where things start to click, and you're seeing it maybe off the field in terms of those accountability measures and all that kind of stuff. And we'll see how that translates on the field here during the season, and what LSU's roster looks like exactly, whether or not it's capable of taking that next step.
We'll get to the portal and what you anticipate happening here as it's open now, and we're starting to see some names flood in. But more on spring, Wilson, and one about the quarterback. It seems like LSU's in really good hands with Garrett Nussmeier.
They do. That 45-yard touchdown to Xavier Thomas. Obviously, Xavier Thomas was wide open. So, like most quarterbacks in the SEC, should be able to make that throw, at least, get him the ball there in that situation. But for him to step up in the pocket, keep his eyes downfield, and then make like an off-platform, just like sling a dart for 45 yards on a rope, like that's not stuff that everybody can do in that regard. He didn't have to take a second to kind of get his feet back underneath him and make that throw. His arm strength is phenomenal, and he looked just so steady out there. He looked in command of the offense. Coming into the spring, I think everybody wanted to just see, because they had added AJ Swan as a transfer, can AJ push Garrett in any way whatsoever? And clearly, Garrett, this is Garrett's job. This is his time, without a doubt. And, AJ and Ricky are battling for that number 2 spot, and we'll see how that shakes out throughout the preseason. If LSU ever needs somebody in that, if something were to, happen with Garrett at any point. But, Garrett looks like a guy who is primed for a really good season. As long as he, keeps the turnovers down, and he obviously was able to do that in the spring game in particular. And so, he wasn't put in a lot of like difficult situations in the game, but it reinforced what you know about Garrett Nussmeier already in terms of his arm strength and his capability. And so it looks like he's in a really good spot here going into his first year as a starter.
I was really impressed with Ricky Collins in the way that he just kind of handled it. I know that he took on some sacks and he was, that there were some things in the pocket that you want to work on. And obviously his timeline doesn't state that he has to play now. But I think if the game was today, it feels like he would be the number 2. Would that be? Would you fall into that train of thought?
Yeah, I think so as well. AJ, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is AJ is still kind of getting used to this offense. That was the thing that Joe Sloan said when asked about the backups earlier this spring, and that he's got a really quick release, and that when he's comfortable, you can tell that he's started 12 games in the SEC. And so during preseason camp, if he's able to sort of have a better control of things, then maybe that changes in terms of who would be the number 2. But right now, the number 2 looks like it would probably be Ricky. We saw him get a little bit of first team run there on Saturday. And it wasn't necessarily super crisp. The offense kind of started to sputter a little bit at that point. He's got to get better, like you said, as a passer and working on things from the pocket. But the athleticism is definitely an advantage. And he's made strides since last year, which is what you want to see it from a guy going from year 1 to year 2. The same time last year, Ricky was not in the same place as a quarterback. He's definitely gotten better. I think that was obvious throughout the spring. Somebody who just felt a little bit more, we watched him a little bit more confident in what he was doing from play to play. Whereas last year as a freshman, it looked like he was probably swimming a little bit there. Then now he's definitely made strides as a quarterback. He's just got to continue to do so that if something did happen to Garrett this season, he is ready to step in. And even not if whenever Garrett's career ends, whether it's after this year and he decides to leave or after the following season, that Ricky would be putting himself in a position to maybe be the starter at that point.
Obviously, all the eyeballs were focused on defense and where the improvement was going to come from. You and I talked a lot about this during the spring that we can talk about the defense every week, but it doesn't feel like this is going to be the group that we're going to be talking about come fall. 2 guys that I believe we will be talking about in the fall is going to be P.J. Woodland and Gabe Relaford, 2 instant impact freshmen that really stood out on Saturday. What do you make of those 2? And we'll get to the overall defense thoughts after that.
They were impressive. I mean, Gabe Relaford in particular, because at that point in the spring, whenever we had just media viewings, you never noticed Gabe Relaford. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was usually rotating like kind of on the 13 defense, like playing mostly there. Like sometimes he would rotate a little bit in with the 2s, but I mean, he was kind of buried on a depth chart that's pretty strong there at defensive end, with guys like Braden Swinson and Deshaun Womack, and until recently Jackson Howard and Dylan Carpenter and folks like that who were kind of ahead of him. And he flashed though. My gosh, his speed around the corner off the edge was really impressive. Got 2 sacks, 3.5 tackles for loss, and obviously they're kind of like tagging off on the sacks, but like he was right there to make plays and just affecting the quarterback constantly. And that was the other thing. Ricky and AJ, I mean, they were never really comfortable during this game because that second team defense was usually winning against the backup offensive line, especially there up front on the edges. And Gabe Relaford was impressive. Like I said, because he hadn't been getting really any like first team reps. One thing that Kelly said post game was, all right, now we need to see him against a Will Campbell and an Emory Jones for LSU to be able to evaluate whether or not he is going to be in the mix in the fall. Because same thing kind of last year, just as a reference point, like Deshaun Womack, he would really win a lot of those reps going up against like the backups and stuff like that. But then you'd see him against Emory Jones, and Emory Jones would kind of like throw him around during preseason camp a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so it took him some time. But like Gabe Relaford, coming in as an early enrollee, maybe it will take some time once he's actually going up against those ones. But if not, and if he's capable of holding his own, then that's a guy who needs to be in the field and on the field in some capacity because you can tell that there's talent there. And PJ, we saw it a little bit more out of him this spring because he was rotated. I mean, he got to the first team defense, and he was with the ones again starting in the scrimmage, and so. He's going to be a factor in this competition, absolutely. We'll see if he holds on to that starting spot throughout the preseason camp. Going into the season, that's probably something that's going to continue, throughout practice there once that resumes. But he's somebody who has definitely put himself in contention for a starting job as a freshman.
I thought the Jackson Howard hit was big, and now watching Relaford on Saturday, it seems like he probably looked at him and was like, I'm out of here.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, gosh, Rutherford was great. And when you're Jackson Howard, you look up above you too, and there's Deshaun, there's Braden Swinson, and there's that was a crowded position room, so it's not necessarily a shock that someone left from it.
All right, so the defense as a whole, Wilson, I know that they're going to be very. Brian Kelly said it. They're getting into the portal and they're going after defensive tackles starting today. So that position's obviously going to look different the next time we see LSU in pads. But what was your takeaway from Blake Baker's first spring here as he wrapped up all 15 workouts?
There was a little bit of a different vibe defensively because you got a new scheme coming in that's designed to be more aggressive. You could tell that guys were being encouraged just to kind of get downhill, make plays. I mean, lots more man coverage, which in the scrimmage, that's what Kyron Lacey scored on. And so like maybe LSU learned that. And I think it probably already knew this, but kind of maybe reaffirmed that it's not going to just be able to play man every play. It's going to have to do some things to maybe give its corner some help here and there. But it also is a defense that, we saw some good edge pressure, especially against that from that second team unit. And from the first team in moments as well during the spring. I mean, that was something that Kelly often said was he really likes what they've got from defensive ends. They've got some third down packages coming in that kind of uses a lot of them at once, like Parrish Sand, Braden Swinson, Deshaun Womack, and Harold Perkins all on the field on third down pass rush situations there. And that seems like something that's encouraging. So, maybe they made some strides. It's hard to tell for sure. But there's definitely a little bit of a different attitude there than there was last season, whereas they were always so just sort of like cautious defensively. It feels like maybe they're trying to set the agenda a little bit more, and hopefully for LSU that kind of pays dividends during the season. They got to get better in different areas. They got to keep getting, add defensive tackles, and even past this year recruit more defensive tackles. Same thing at cornerback and some of those other positions, but it does feel like, at least in terms of like what they're trying to do defensively, that it's in a more like an assertive place than it was last year.
Offensively, obviously, the offensive line looks like the strong unit there when you just watch them play. How good do you anticipate them to be here in Brad Davis's third year, and you're getting Emory Jones and Will Campbell in this money year, their draft year that we've all kind of pointed at and said, man, when they get there, they're going to be elite. Well, here we are.
Really, really good. That's what I anticipate. I mean, you watch them at times here in the spring. That's the thing. Like the offensive line, there was some moments in the spring where they would just dominate. We saw it in the spring game too, like that counter run for Caleb Jackson for a touchdown or Josh Williams touchdown during the red zone period where they just took over. And there was a lot of that during the spring, which is kind of an indictment on the defensive front, and which is not something that you necessarily want to see. But maybe if LSU adds some defensive tackles, some of that maybe doesn't happen. But obviously it all kind of works in tandem. But also this offensive line is really, really good. And Joe Moore finalist a year ago, and then they only lose one guy, and they replace him with DJ Chester, who people were raving about throughout the spring. Just somebody who's come in right away physically, looks like he no sort of drop off whatsoever there. And you wouldn't expect a physical drop off there because he's 6'6", 315, kind of an upgrade physically maybe. But also no drop off in terms of his ability to communicate, get everybody lined up, do all those things that a center has to do. And so this offensive line looks like it's going to be fantastic this year. And it better be, because LSU is building everything it wants to do offensively on that foundation. If they can open up holes in the run game, and then LSU can run play action and start to stretch things vertically, then they're going to be in great shape. As long as everybody stays healthy, I would bet that's probably ends up being, by the end of the year, the best offensive line in the SEC, and certainly one of the top three. They'll probably be back in contention for that Joe Moore Award if everybody stays healthy. I
agree. Any competition leaving spring you're encouraged or interested in watching over the summer going into fall that we'll be watching for before next season?
Let's see, like positional competition. Definitely
wide
corner.
receiver?
Yeah, definitely. CJ Daniels and Xavion Thomas showed what they can do a little bit there in the spring game. CJ with some nice catches near the end. Xavion with his speed on that touchdown. That one's for sure. I mean, number 2 and number 3 receiver, really. Chris Hilton's going to be in the mix there. He didn't have a great spring game, but by all accounts, he'd had a good spring up to that point. So he'll be in contention for some playing time. Aaron Anderson has done some decent things here in the spring. They like him. And so you've got a group of kind of like 5 to 7 guys where, Shelton Sampson and Kyle Parker, can they make a move to crack the rotation fully? We saw a little bit more out of Kyle this spring than we did Shelton. So Kyron looks established and firm as that kind of number one receiver going into the season. And he had a fantastic spring. But then right around him, there's a lot of jockeying for playing time and roles. And so that's definitely a good one to see who's that kind of number 2 and 3 receiver, and on the other side of the ball, who's playing corner, and how does the defensive tackle competition shake out once they get everybody they want in that room.
Another freshman that stood out was McBride, Deshaun McBride, the safety.
Oh, yeah.
I'd imagine that there's a big emphasis of getting him on the field early. Safety looks like a position that could be healthy for him next season. I know they're young, but it looks like a position that could be good on numbers, at least.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly have gotten that into a better position. Getting Jordan Gilbert, Texas A&M transfer there. You got a guy who started 10 games in the SEC a couple years ago. Sage Ryan, I think he's kind of back at his natural position, and you've got Major Burns down closer to the line of scrimmage as the star. And so that feels like something where, like, those three are probably your starters. And it would be surprised if maybe going into USC that changed. And then maybe if somebody struggles, then maybe that's when Deshaun comes into the game kind of thing. Or maybe he just has such a good fall camp that they have no choice but to try to get him onto the field. He really looks impressive for somebody his age in particular. Does he still have things he has to work on? Sure, of course, but like he just kind of stands out and pops whenever you see him on the field. And that they, even if LSU would be in a great spot if it doesn't have to put him on the field right away. That's and like let him kind of develop and get up to speed. But if he's in a position where you need to get him on the field, then you just probably got to do it. But like you got him, you got Joel Rogers, another true freshman early enrollee who had kind of worked his way up the depth chart into rotating with the twos this spring. Jordan Allen has got himself on the second team defense, and Kylan Jackson flashed as the second team star as well. I thought he looked good in the spring game. So it feels like they're in a stronger position at safety than they were last year. Is it going to be necessarily like a strength? Who knows? We're going to have to let that all kind of play out. But they do seem to be like maybe in a little bit of a better spot, more comfortable spot there with the guys they got in the back end.
Transfer portal opens today. We saw Jacoby Matthews' name, an early popular name everybody's paying attention to. Speaking of safety, what do we anticipate, Wilson? Everybody who covers this, everybody who's around the sport says this is going to be wild over the next 48, 72 hours. What do you expect the effect of LSU having, whether good or bad, on this?
Yeah, I don't know how much of a player LSU is going to be in terms of like what we see nationally, where it looks like nationally this thing is going to be absolutely chaotic because you've got the players can transfer to multiple times and still be eligible. Doesn't matter. Like the only you had all those coaching changes in January, so like team players might be leaving their teams. The only thing that like has some restrictions still in place is that you can't transfer within the SEC and play right away. But like everywhere, there's like no other like rules against like transferring at this point. So like it's going to be absolutely wild. LSU though, I don't know how much it's going to be necessarily like. We're going to have to just kind of see like how many guys they lose, because it's hard to sort of know right at this moment what kind of losses they could be looking at. They might not be looking at a whole lot because they are over that 85-man limit, so they're going to have to. There's going to have to be some room made. They're going to have to lose, a few guys. They're going to have to be a little bit of attrition there. But if they got into like double-digit losses, I think that would be kind of a surprise. 5, maybe 6. That would probably be a little bit more of what you're anticipating at this point because of where they're at in terms of their roster numbers, and they still want to add a little bit, especially defensive tackles. But I think there'll be major players in the defensive tackle market, but like there's not. Like if everything else goes well, then they won't be losing a whole lot. And in terms of what's going on nationally, you won't hear about LSU very much if things are going well.
Mm-hmm. And that should be a good thing, right? I mean, like because LSU's pretty secure on where they are.
Yeah.
These coaches seem to fit in, right? I mean, the first spring coaches you got to hear from Blake Baker, obviously through the press, and then Joe Sloan also met with the press. But I know we talked about Corey Raymond and Bo Davis a lot, but there's also some, there's new faces scattered all over the field, whether it's Nagel or Peoples or on down the line. What have you made of these new faces, new voices after seeing them coach these guys up?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like LSU did get a really good coaching staff put together here. And obviously coming off of last season, that was the major emphasis. It's like personnel-wise, there's not a lot of new players, at least in terms of like through the portal. Obviously it added a ton of freshmen and that kind of thing. But trying to get this team turned around in the right direction. And we say turned around coming off a 10-3 season, but that defense was what it was. It was all on the coaching staff, and it feels like they've at least put a really good effort forward in terms of trying to get that corrected and get these players coached up. I mean, Kevin Peoples looks really sharp as the defensive ends coach, and it's also just good that LSU's defensive front is just getting kind of that individual instruction, from people who are experienced in that field here, that they didn't get last year, especially last season. I mean, there was so much turnover. And it looks worse, like looking back on it now that you see like stability in place with Bo Davis and Kevin Peoples. It's like, oh man, they really were not getting much coaching until really Pete Jenkins came in. I mean, because what happened with Jimmy Lindsey and then John Jancic was out of position there, and you had Bob Diaco working on the outside linebackers. Now everything's just sort of like seems a little bit more dedicated, and just more. I don't know, just better for those units that they have those guys there. Nagel comes in as a guy who's got some play calling experience. His coach tight ends a good bit. LSU is going to be wanting to run some 12 personnel, and it feels like Mac Markway and Kamori Pimpton are making strides toward being able to contribute in that way. And so it feels like they did add some good coaching pieces here. Are we going to necessarily see like tons of improvement, going into this year? It's hard to say at this point, just because you got to get the players in there too. But it does feel like they have a coaching staff that puts them in a good spot. I'll be surprised if this group doesn't have some success. They seem really well equipped in the roles they're in.
One more, Wilson, I get you out of here. One that was, I think, a little concerning, and maybe not something that we talk about, because LSU's had a great offense over the last couple of years. We haven't seen the punter a lot, but they've been pretty secure with Jay Bramblett. Now Bramblett turns over, and you've got a new offensive structure coming in, and Peyton Todd does not look as developed as I thought he would be 3 years later. What you can hear it in Brian Kelly's voice. He's concerned there. What do you make of that competition?
It's Polian's fault.
Yeah, it's. I mean. Are you wrong? It's that's why I asked Kelly after the scrimmage about that, what he had made of Peyton Todd spring, because whenever we saw it, it just wasn't consistent enough, and that's what Kelly said, like it wasn't consistent enough, and that's what everything we saw. He's got a powerful leg, but the accuracy hasn't always been there, and it's sometimes that thing wobbles and it's a little bit shaky, and that was. Last year during the spring game, we saw, I remember, I guess this is to kind of maybe tamp down on it a little bit, but we saw, Damian Ramos and Nathan Dybert really struggle in the spring game last year. And then Ramos was, perfectly fine as the kicker during the season. Yeah. So maybe, everything will be okay if they saw something different throughout, spring practice. But it is certainly an area where a little bit of an area of concern right now, because, there's not much of a competition to speak of because LSU doesn't really have another
Nussmeier. They're going to go for it on fourth down.
I mean, who knows? Yeah, right. It could end up shaping their strategy if it ends up being a real weakness. You've got a redshirt freshman walk-on named Badger Hargett, who's I hope I'm pronouncing that last name correctly. Who's on the team, but and then their kicker signee has got some punting experience, Burrell, but it's a little bit of a concern you're going to the offseason. I'll be interested to see if anything happens with that punter spot in the portal. If they go after one, and that would be kind of certainly a sign of what they're thinking at this point. If they don't, then it's vote of confidence for Peyton Todd, but he's got to punt better if he ends up being the starter during the season, because what we saw there in the spring game was not going to cut it.
Wilson, you're the absolute best, man. We appreciate your time, as always, on Tuesdays and the insight to the football program. You obviously do a great job in covering it. Enjoy the offseason, if there is one for you. I know that recruiting is in full swing, and they picked up a commitment over the weekend and running back JT Lindsey, but we will continue to follow you on social and look forward to our segment picking back up once the fall hits and around fall camp in August.
Sounds good. I appreciate y'all having me every week for, how long have we been? For a while now. And it's always good to see y'all, and I hope you guys have a good summer too.
There he is, Wilson Alexander. Follow our guy on social media to keep up with the best. At WH Alexander _ We will tap back into that information come fall camp when the Tigers are poured on August